Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Clary Butler. I'm going to be your facilitator for our session on implicit versus explicit bias. We're going to be talking about a number of things that we believe will help with regards to reconciliation. Now, you're going to hear a number of terms, reconciliation being one of them, and that's the joining of two uh, contravening parties. And that's one thing that's over here, another thing that's over here, and they are juxtaposed. And so we're going to bring them together. And you have often heard of reconciliation with regards to like a checkbook or something like that. But the overarching theme is going to be reconciliation. You may have also heard of it in terms of racial reconciliation. And that's often what bias is referred to. But we're going to be talking about bias in a number of contexts. And so I think it's time for us to begin. Again, our training is going to be primarily focused on bias, but it's going to cover a number of things. And so thank you for being with us today. First, this is going to be given from a global perspective. And so that's why, as you can see there, there's a map of the entire world. You will see as we weave this concept of bias throughout our sessions that bias is not relegated to America, but it is a global issue. And so thank you for being a part of the solution instead of the problem. We are going to start with some introductions, and then we're going to go through objectives, rules of engagement, and then an overview. Under normal circumstances, I would not go through a long list of introductions as it relates to me, but because this is a recorded presentation, I'm going to do my introductions now. Usually, I just dribble my introductions and different things based on my history out as we engage and have conversation because I want to know a little bit about you and then you can learn a little bit about me. But because I'm the only one that's sharing in a little bit more of a lecture format, I am going to share some things about me now so that you know what the facilitator is all about. First of all, I am from Charleston, South Carolina. I went to the Citadel and received a teacher cadet certification there, and that was my first foray into teaching. I then went to the University of South Carolina, the main campus there in Columbia, South Carolina. And then after spending about a year and a half there, I transferred to the University of Alabama. I graduated with my Bachelor of Science at the University of Alabama. While I was there, I actually walked on to the football team. And I may make some references about that as we go through our sessions. By the way, I'll talk about this in a moment, but we have 5 sessions. This is the first of 5. Immediately after leaving the University of Alabama, I received my Doctor of Jurisprudence degree, which is a law degree from Indiana University in Indianapolis, Indiana. While I was there, I worked for the governor for 4 years, and then I worked in government for some years immediately following that. And then I had this inkling, this urge to do work in the community, and I did it through the local church. And so I went to seminary and Bible college at the House of God Academy and Bible College in Nashville, Tennessee, and then at Trinity. After that, I did some PhD work at Purdue University. And although I didn't complete my PhD work, which is in political theory and comparative politics, I continued my studies, and I am now a student at Harvard University in the way of corporate finance. And so I'm learning all about what it means to understand emerging markets and international trade and the stock market and so forth and so on. And so I've had a number of experiences in things, but my experience as it relates to racial reconciliation started about 21 years ago. I've been at this for about 21 years. It's been quite a journey. Both working as the deputy director for the Indiana Commission on the Social Status of Black Males, which is a quasi government agency in Indiana, where we studied the social determinants of the African American male. I then worked for a number of entities, including the Indiana Minority Health Coalition as the chief of staff. I started a department there at Trinity International University, where I'm an adjunct professor, where it was a multicultural development department, and it became the intercultural development department. I also did a number of ministry endeavors and traveled throughout the world, understanding race and bias and a number of the things that we're going to be talking about today. Okay, that is enough about me. Let's jump back into what we all have come today to do, which is to understand bias. And we're going to do that by looking through our objectives, as well as understanding rules of engagement. Now, for you all, the rules of engagement will primarily be focused towards the rules of engagement that you will have when you're engaging with others, because this is a little bit more lecture format, and we're doing this with regards to me sharing information. You won't have an opportunity to give me feedback. So your rules of engagement will be you engaging with others in the community, maybe interpersonal relationships, colleagues, family members, and so forth. So we want you to pay attention to those rules, because there are some racial reconciliation rules that are extremely important if you're going to still be friends with the person after you engage. And so we're going to do that, and then we're going to give a brief overview of where we are now and where we hope to be at the end of our time. So, the whole purpose of what we hope to accomplish is to provide awareness and understanding of implicit bias, explicit bias, and structural racism in a relevant and contemporary context. We also want to provide awareness and understanding with specific examples regarding the impact of implicit and explicit bias in a clinical setting, because of what a number of us will be dealing with, which is the clinical setting. We also want everybody to complete the implicit bias assessment. That's the Harvard assessment, where we will have an opportunity for those of us that will be in the class. We're actually going to discuss that. We're going to get some feedback from you, and I'm going to give some feedback. And so that's the implicit bias assessment that's conducted by Harvard. Now, as I said, I'm a student at Harvard. I did not conduct this assessment, but when we get to session 2, you'll find out a little bit more about what that assessment is all about. And then finally, and this is extremely important, unlike other training sessions or classes or courses that you've been a part of, we're going to try as best we can to provide strategies for objective implicit bias behavior modification. Those of you that want to enhance yourselves so that your community is better, your relationships are better, and even the work that you're doing with regards to your career, that's also better. And so we're going to provide awareness that we all have biases, and it's a worthwhile lifetime journey to dismantle them. So here are the rules of engagement that I talked about just a few moments ago. First, this is hard work. I want to say that again. This is extremely hard. And each participant should be prepared to interact and engage, whether it's in a course setting, or I should say in a classroom setting, right? As we're going through the training, or if you're doing this in your local community, you should be prepared to engage in a thoughtful and respectful manner. Discussions will include, but are not limited to, the pre-work that we talked about, but it has to be done, if it's going to be done well, in a judgment-free environment. Next, success is determined by a lifetime commitment to this. If you think that you will be able to engage for 5 weeks or 5 days or 5 months or anything that's a limited period of time, I believe that you're going to be sadly mistaken. I have not met one person that has been able to completely grasp everything and never need additional or continual learning. This is a lifetime commitment if we're going to do it well, if we're going to be successful. We also want you to seek to understand as opposed to always seeking to be understood. And if you have any questions, they can be submitted anonymously or otherwise. You can see my email address there at the bottom of the screen. And so our sessions, with regards to the live sessions, are like this. We will have a third of it that will be raising awareness. A third will be cultural appropriation and identification and integration. And what that basically means is we're going to try to categorize things as best we can so that you know, here's what bias means, here's how it can be appropriately affixed, and here's where bias shouldn't be appropriately affixed. Here's unconscious bias, here's implicit bias, here's conscious bias, etc. So we're going to try to categorize things well for you so that it will all make sense. And then a third of it, particularly for those that fully engage our coursework, is going to be based on your feedback. And that's why I gave you my email address. But it will also be based on the interaction for those that will participate in the live sessions. So we said that we had three areas of the pre-work in no particular order. The first is the Harvard implicit bias assessment. Now, that the purpose of that was to pre-assess the standard in which we perceive otherness. And we want to look at that assessment in this way. During that assessment, each participant will expeditiously sort images and words into categories. And if you've already taken that assessment, you know that it was given to you quickly, and we'll explain and deconstruct all of why it was done that way. But that assessment was meant to question your beliefs, your attitudes, your opinions, and your standard demographic. Each person should have received or will receive your results immediately upon completion. And we want you to bring those results. If you're going to participate in the live session, we want you to bring those with you so that we can discuss. Next, and again, in no particular order, was the pre work regarding the Dr. Susan Moore case. Now, Dr. Susan Moore is a physician from Carmel, Indiana, who unfortunately lost her life. And we want you to become familiar with the video and any other information that you can gather around Dr. Moore's case. It was a tragedy within the Indiana healthcare system. Now, one of the things that you're going to see is that we're going to talk about a number of terms regarding reconciliation. One of them is this term called intersectionality. And here's the first time that we're going to be introduced with this term intersectionality, because we've got a recent tragedy that is in Indiana that revolves the healthcare system, and it is unfortunately related to bias and race, and in this situation, COVID-19. And so that is a lot of things that are intersecting that we're all going to try and unpack when we get to that. But that's a part of the pre-work. We want you to review that and be prepared to discuss if you're going to be a part of the live sessions. But if you're watching this in the lecture format, by all means, you can use that particular pre-work to engage with me using my email. We will not litigate that case. As best I understand, that case is still being investigated, but we will develop a perspective regarding the current affairs and the modern application of that as it relates to race and bias. And so here are some of the terms that we are going to be going through. We're going to be talking about race and class and fairness and culture, and a lot of these things were introduced in the third thing that I want to introduce as our pre-work, which was a conversation that I had. It was a lot more of a monologue because I was standing on a stage in front of about 2,000 to 3,000 people there in Chicago on the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I had the opportunity to share a lot of these terms that you will see, including equality and prejudice and assimilation and disproportionality and appropriation and intersectionality that I just mentioned. And so you will hear these things weaved between the different sessions that we're going to be doing over the next several weeks. But we wanted you to be introduced to that, as well as the rhythm of me and a little bit about my background. And so that's why we wanted to give that to you as pre-work as well. All right, so here we are. We have 5 sessions, and I'm going to talk through these sessions. But again, I want to reemphasize that our focus is going to be on bias. Session number 5, when we complete things, we're going to complete them talking about the beloved community and next steps. We want to define and appreciate the beloved community as it relates to our coursework. We want to contextualize those next steps based on each participant's progression. We are only able to do that if we get the feedback. If it's a live session, obviously we'll be able to interact with others that will be in the training as well. Our next to last session will be entitled So What Now, Part 2, which means that session 3 is going to be part 1 of So What Now. And in both session 3 and session 4, we're going to be identifying internal implicit bias and the potential impact on roles and responsibilities that we have. We're going to develop a personal plan or framework to reduce bias in decision-making and behavior. And we're going to analyze and evaluate practices and processes and procedures with practical steps towards systemic reconciliation. And as we go to session 3, that's going to be part 1 of the so what noun, where we identify the internal implicit bias and the potential impact on the roles and responsibilities that we have. So, session 2, next week, we will cover why am I biased and how do I overcome? That's going to be an analysis, the pre assessment, and the things that shape us, experiences, education, environment, understanding the difference between interpersonal, institutional, and structural racism, and how they impact the health and well being of our members. And then today, we're going to introduce race and bias, privilege, and other key reconciliation terms, some of which I already started to talk through. And it's going to be an analysis of systems of oppression embedded within the infrastructure of a country that continually reinforces the cultural divide between people groups. Now, if you are in the live session, you'll know that we're going to engage a little bit. But if you are in the lecture course, then I'm going to list a few terms. I'm going to ask you to get out a sheet of paper, and you're going to do this on your own. I'm going to list some terms or titles and categories. And as I list them, what I want you to do is I want you to write down the first proper noun. That is the first name that comes to your mind. I'm going to give you an example, and then we're going to do the exercise. The example is, if I was to list governor, the first proper noun that comes to your mind might be Ronald Reagan, he was a governor, or George Bush, he was a governor. Or you may think of Arnold Schwarzenegger or Holcomb. I'm listing all male governors, by the way, but you can list any governor that you can think of. Nikki Haley in South Carolina, what have you, whatever governor that you think of. That's what I want you to do. The first name that you think of. So I'm going to list the title or the category, and then you write down, for those that are participating in the lecture, for those that are participating in the live training, I want you to write down in the chat the first name, first and last, that you think of. And so here we go. The first name that I'm going to tell you, or the first title that I'm going to tell you, is the title of lawyer. I'm going to give you just a second. This is not an overthinking exercise. I just want you to write down the very first name that you think of, first and last, when you think of lawyer. All right, I think we're ready for the next one. The very first name that you think of when I give you the name of the category, athlete. Okay, if you're still with me, you're doing great. Here's the next category. First name, first and last name that you think of when you hear the title or category, genius. Okay, so what's the first name, first and last, that you think about when you hear the title hip hop rap? First name, even if you don't listen to hip hop or rap, what's the first name that you think about? The next category, what do you think about when you hear the name or category rich or wealthy? What's the first name that you think about when you hear that category, rich slash wealthy? So here's the last one that we'll do. What name slash uh, proper noun do you think of, first and last name, do you think of when you hear the title slash category CEO? And you can't mention your boss. You have to just mention a generic person, perhaps someone that you heard about on television or someone that you know in a different context. But I need to know what you think about when you hear the acronym CEO, as in Chief Executive Officer or boss. So there you have it: lawyer, athlete, genius, rich or wealthy, CEO. What did you put down? Well, the overwhelming responses in a number of the categories suggest that we have a bias towards one category or the other. Look at what you put down. Oftentimes, people will put for lawyer like Matlock or Kin Nunn, a lawyer that they may have heard about in the commercial. Oftentimes, males will put males, and females might introduce a female, but the overwhelming response of females is often also a male. Did you put down an Asian American lawyer, a Latino lawyer, a Latina lawyer, a Hispanic lawyer? Did you put down a female lawyer if you were a male? This is the challenge that is often presented by bias. Let's continue. For athlete, did you put down a female athlete? And if you did, was that female athlete white or black? Because often the narrative when we talk about athletes in America, it's often white or black. So it's a Peyton Manning or Tom Brady, or it's a Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant. But what about the tons of incredible athletes that are Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, Latinx? What about the fact that we often mention males in athletic categories, but the most decorated Olympian of all time is a female named Simone Biles? How about the genius category? What did you put down? Often we list Stephen Hawking or Albert Einstein, which is the most popular name in the genius category. We often mention, regardless of our ethnicity or nationality, we often mention deceased white males as to say that there are no geniuses that we know, but there are plenty geniuses that we know. And females, by the way, use both sides of their brain, whereas males only use one side of their brain. Females are overwhelmingly filling our universities and colleges. But overwhelmingly, in sessions like this, we exemplify genius and equate that with white male, and often with deceased white male. How about hip hop and rap? What did you put down? Often with hip hop and rap, we list black males. Every now and again, we'll list a black female entertainer, but it's usually black males. Now, why is our propensity, our bias towards black males, such as Jay-Z? We list black males like Puff Daddy and Mace, and if you go old school, MC Hammer and Run DMC. We list them because often that's how we're influenced by popular culture. That's how we're influenced by our interpersonal relationships. That's how we're influenced by social media and the media. But the number one consumers of rap are Caucasian young adults. And so we need to check our bias. Now, bias can be analogized similar to blind spots. And a blind spot we know is what we would have if we were on an interstate driving and we were ready to change lanes or to advance. And in order to do so, we've just got to check perhaps the rear view mirror or just look to the side so that we can make sure that we're not going to infringe upon someone else's right of way. And if we don't take that glance, even as we're driving forward, even as we're moving forward, then we can cause tremendous harm to everyone in our vehicle, including ourselves, and we can cause an accident with someone else. Now, that's terrible when we're in an automobile on an interstate, and it's just as bad, just as harmful with regards to bias because it can harm our interpersonal relationships. It can harm our family members. It can harm our marriage when there's a bias in place and we don't check that bias. It can harm our careers. Hundreds of thousands of people that have lost their jobs because of unchecked bias or not checking their blind spot. And so, what is bias? Bias is a disproportionate weight in favor of or against an idea or a thing, usually in a way that is closed minded, prejudicial, or unfair. Bias can be innate or learned. People may develop biases for or against an individual, a group, or a belief. In science and engineering, a bias is a systematic error. And we're all here because we know that bias, like a blind spot, is just it's one of those things. It's what we have. The science suggests that each individual has between 2.3 and 2.5 blind spots. And so we need to do what we have to do in order to check biases that could potentially cause harm the same way a blind spot could potentially cause an accident. Here's a quick video that we want you to watch as we end our time as a summation of everything that we've talked about. Take a look at this.
New research from the fields of neuroscience and social psychology has shed light onto the concept of unconscious bias. But what exactly is unconscious bias, and how does it affect our behaviors and decisions? Unconscious biases are simply our unintended people preferences. They are formed by our socialization, our personal experiences, and the representations of different groups in the media. These experiences act as social filters in which we make assessments and judgments of people around us. Research tells us that human beings have a natural tendency to place individuals into social categories. These categories are often based on visual cues such as gender, cultural background, age, height, or body size. We also categorize based on social background, job roles, religious identity, or political affiliation. The unconscious brain uses associations based on social categories to develop biases. For example, if we are constantly exposed to women as primary school teachers or receptionists, or men as plumbers and organizational leaders, these associations become wired within the human brain. The unconscious brain uses social categories to make unconscious judgments about people who are similar to us and people who are different from us. A common form of unconscious bias is affinity bias. This type of bias impacts talent processes in organizational decision-making, including how we recruit. Managers are more likely to hire people who look similar or with sounding names to them. Work allocation. Managers are more likely to assign key client projects to individuals within their teams who they have an unconscious affinity with. Performance. Where there is some kind of affinity, managers are more likely to spend time informally discussing positive contributions to the team and will focus on development and future work plans. For those where there is little affinity, managers are more likely to question past performance. The conversation will be less friendly and even hostile at times. Unconscious bias often results in a set of micro-behaviors. Examples of positive micro-behaviors include supporting the ideas of someone with who you have an unconscious affinity whilst in a team meeting, or simply wanting to have coffee with someone like you. Examples of negative micro-behaviors include checking emails on your phone whilst talking to a colleague or cutting someone off in a meeting. Often our intention is not to make biased decisions, and through a focus on conscious thinking and by creating inclusive work cultures, we can learn to control our unconscious judgments and mitigate the impact of bias on our talent programs.